The coffee had gone cold on the counter by the time I realized I had been standing at my kitchen window for 20 minutes without moving. Not looking at anything in particular. Just standing there the way a man stands when something is wrong but he cannot name what it is yet. The yard was still out there. The 11 acres I had spent 30 years paying off and building onto were still out there, quiet in the early morning dark the way Georgia gets quiet in November, that specific stillness that is not peaceful so much as it is waiting. The dogs were asleep on the back porch. The workshop light was off. Everything was exactly where I had left it the night before. But I was standing at the window at 5:40 in the morning holding a mug of cold coffee and I had not moved in 20 minutes, and that told me something my mind was not yet ready to acknowledge out loud. My daughter's last text was 11 days old. 11 days. I counted more than once, the way you count something when you are hoping the number will change if you go back to it a second time. It does not change. Before that 11-day silence, a streak of one-word replies that had started sometime in September and had been shortening ever since. Busy. Later. For words over a span of 6 weeks from a woman who used to send me voice memos while she was driving to work, just to tell me what she was thinking about. 40-second voice memos about nothing in particular, a song on the radio, a funny thing she had seen at the grocery store, a memory of something her mother used to say. Small ordinary transmissions that told me she was thinking about me even when neither of us was saying anything important. Those had stopped in August. I marked it when it happened because I am the kind of person who marks things, even when I tell myself I am not keeping track. She used to call on Sunday mornings. Not every Sunday. Most Sundays. Enough Sundays that when Sunday came and the phone stayed silent, I felt the shape of what was missing the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. Not looking for it, just suddenly aware of the space where something used to be. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself this for 3 months. People get busy. She had a full life 2,000 miles away in Portland, Oregon. A job she cared about, a husband, a house, friends, a neighborhood with coffee shops and farmers markets and a Japanese maple in the front yard that had turned copper in October. A whole life that had nothing to do with an old man standing at a window in Georgia before sunrise. I told myself all the things a father tells himself when his instincts are sending him signals he is not prepared to receive. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. I stood there listening to it drain. Then I went and sat at the kitchen table and I opened my laptop and I booked the flight. I did not tell her I was coming. I told myself it was because I wanted the surprise to be genuine. The laugh she used to give when I showed up unexpectedly, that particular laugh that was half delight and half exasperation and completely hers. I had driven 3 hours to her college dormitory once with a bag of her mother's oatmeal cookies, the ones Carol made with dark brown sugar and a half teaspoon of cardamom that Melissa had requested specifically in a phone call that sounded more homesick than she intended, and Melissa had opened the door and made that laugh and I had held onto the sound of it the whole 3 hours back to Decatur. That was what I told myself I was going to hear again when she opened her door in Portland. But sitting in the window seat somewhere over Oklahoma, watching the flat brown geometry of the plains pass underneath me in the early morning light, I understood the more honest version of why I had not called ahead. If I told her I was coming, she would have a reason to prepare. And I had been prepared for long enough. I was tired of being managed. I wanted to see the unmanaged version of whatever was happening. I had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. Neither did they. My name is Raymond Coles. I turned 62 years old that November, 3 weeks before I got on that plane, and I marked the occasion by eating dinner alone at the kitchen table with the television on in the other room for company, a nature documentary about migratory birds that I watched with half my attention while I thought about the year that had just passed and what I wanted the year ahead to look like. Not a sad evening. Just a quiet one. I have learned the difference. I live on 11 acres outside Decatur, Georgia, about 16 miles east of Atlanta in a part of the county that used to be all farmland and is now a mixed territory of old family properties and newer subdivisions that arrived in the 90s and kept coming. My 11 acres are what is left of a larger parcel my father owned, reduced by a sale he made in 1987 that I did not fully understand at the time and cannot undo now, but what remains is mine and it is enough. Mature trees, mostly white oak and loblolly pine, A creek that runs along the eastern boundary that actually runs year-round except in the worst of droughts. A barn I use for storage that was there when my father was there and will likely be there after I am gone. The house itself is a 1960s ranch that I have added onto twice. The back bedroom addition was the first project, completed the summer Melissa was 9 years old. A summer I remember mostly for the heat and for Melissa's habit of bringing me lemonade that was approximately 40% sugar and watching me work from a safe distance with the intense, focused attention of a child who has decided this is something worth understanding. The wraparound porch was the second project, completed 3 years after Carol passed, partly because I needed something to do with my hands in that particular season of grief and partly because Carol had wanted a porch like that since the first year we owned the house and I had never gotten to it and finishing it felt like a conversation I owed her. I spent 31 years working electrical for a commercial construction outfit based out of Stone Mountain. Not management. Not project oversight. The actual work, pulling wire through concrete slabs in the Atlanta August heat that makes the air feel solid. Running conduit through walls in buildings that were going up fast and needed someone who could work fast without making mistakes that cost the crew time later. I have calluses on my hands that have been there so long they are part of the architecture of my palms. My knees started having opinions about ladders in my late 50s. My back has been telling me things I do not always want to hear since around 2017. The work changed me physically in ways I notice every morning when I stand up from bed and every evening when I sit back down, and I do not regret any of it. There is a specific kind of tiredness that comes from doing honest physical work for 30 years, and it is not the same as any other kind of tired. It has dignity in it even when it hurts. My wife Carol. I could write a separate story that long about Carol, and it would not be long enough. She was from a family in Macon, the fourth of 5 children, a woman who had been expected to be quieter than she was and had declined that expectation politely but completely from approximately age 14. She was a first-grade teacher for 22 years. She read novels the way some people breathe, constantly, automatically, as a basic function of being alive. She corrected my mispronunciations with the same mild, persistent patience she used on 6-year-olds, which I can see now was both entirely appropriate and slightly hilarious. She made oatmeal cookies with dark brown sugar and cardamom. She left coffee on the counter before she woke me up, not a note, just coffee, hot, in the blue mug she knew I preferred, and that was how she told me every morning that she was still thinking about me before the day had started. She passed 9 years ago. Ovarian cancer. We had 24 years together, and I would trade every comfortable acre of those 11 to have one more Tuesday afternoon of her reading on the porch and occasionally reading a sentence out loud that she thought I should hear. Just one. That is the specific thing I would ask for if I were offered anything I wanted. One Tuesday afternoon on the porch. Our daughter is Melissa and Coles, now Melissa and Hartwell, 34 years old, housing advocacy nonprofit program manager, reader of literary fiction and listener of podcasts about history, maker of an excellent lemon pasta that she learned from a YouTube video and refined over 2 years until it was genuinely her own. She has her mother's stubbornness and her mother's laugh and her mother's particular way of going quiet when she is thinking hard about something, a stillness that looks like withdrawal but is actually the opposite, full engagement turned entirely inward. She wore Carol's earrings at her wedding. Small pearl drops that Carol had worn to her own college graduation in 1979. When I saw them on Melissa's ears as she came down the aisle, I held myself together for approximately 4 seconds and then I did not. And then I did again because the day was hers and she deserved to see me steady. She married Derek Hartwell 6 years ago at a venue outside Asheville on an October day that was perfect in that specific way October days in the North Carolina mountains are perfect, cold bright, the trees absolutely committed to going out in the most dramatic way possible, the air tasting of something clean and close to ending. Derek was 36 at the time, a financial analyst at a boutique investment firm in Atlanta, a man with excellent posture and a wardrobe that communicated success with a consistency that I eventually came to understand was itself a kind of performance. He was charming in a practiced way. Good stories at dinner tables. The right references. Comfortable in rooms where money was present and known to be present. I gave him a chance because Melissa loved him and because I am a fair person and because sometimes men who seem hollow actually have depth that takes time to reach. I gave Derek Hartwell 4 years of fair consideration. At the end of 4 years of watching and listening and giving benefit of doubt, I had the following conclusion: he was exactly what he appeared to be at the surface, which was a man who was very good at appearing. The first signal I noticed was at Christmas dinner 2 years before all of this. We were at their table in Portland, the house in the quiet neighborhood with the Japanese maple Melissa had been so proud of, the one with dark hardwood floors and a kitchen that had been renovated by the previous owners in a way that photographed well. Derek was pouring wine and telling a story about a colleague who had mishandled a client relationship, and the whole table was laughing, and I was watching him the way I sometimes watch people when I am not quite listening, not reading the words, reading the frequency. And there was a moment, one specific moment during the laughter, when he did a quick survey of the room. Not dramatic. Subtle. The kind of inventory a person takes when they want to know who is engaged with them and who is not. Who is useful to the scene and who is not. His eyes moved across the table and they landed on me for just a fraction of a moment, and something in them did a small quiet calculation and then moved on to Melissa's college friend on his left, who was laughing the most enthusiastically. I would not have caught it if I had been looking anywhere else. I tucked it the way men of a certain age and experience tuck things they cannot yet prove, not in a pocket they forget about, but in a drawer they know exactly how to open. I landed at PDX on a Wednesday morning in late November. The temperature was 41 degrees and the rain was doing what Portland rain does, not dramatic, not impressive, just absolutely relentless in its low-key presence, as though it had been raining since before you arrived and would still be raining long after you left, and had never given the question of stopping any serious consideration. I had a rolling bag and a flat white box of Melissa's favorite pecan turtles from a shop in Decatur that ships their orders in styrofoam coolers to keep the chocolate from going soft in transit. I had ordered them 3 days before the flight. I had been thinking about the look on her face when she opened the box. Her mother used to order them for Melissa's birthday every year without fail, and after Carol died I had picked up the tradition without either of us mentioning it, and it had become one of those small continuous gestures that constitutes a large part of what love actually looks like in practice over time. Not grand declarations. A styrofoam box shipped with care. I took a rideshare from the airport. The driver was a quiet man from Eritrea who had a small photograph of a woman and 2 children clipped to his sun visor, and who drove with the focused serenity of someone who has made peace with his current situation. We did not talk much. I watched Portland pass outside the window, the neighborhoods shifting from commercial to residential as we moved east, the trees going bare the way Northwest trees go bare, reluctantly and completely, the wet streets reflecting headlights and coffee shop windows, and the occasional commuter on a bicycle who appeared to have decided that weather was an irrelevant variable. Melissa's neighborhood was quiet in the specific way of neighborhoods where the yards are maintained by people who are paid to maintain them. The houses were large and set back from the street by mature trees. The Japanese maple in her front yard had dropped most of its leaves, but a few copper ones still clung to the outermost branches with the stubborn persistence of things that are not ready to let go yet. I stood at the bottom of her front path for a moment, rolling bag beside me, pecan turtle box under my arm, and I looked at that tree and I thought about the photograph she had sent me when they first moved in. She was standing beside it in early October, wearing a green jacket, and she was smiling the way she smiled when she was genuinely happy, which is different from the way she smiled when she was performing happy, and in that photograph the difference was clear, and I had looked at it so many times because it showed me clearly which category her life had been in at that particular moment. I thought about that photograph, and then I walked up the front path and I knocked on the dark green door. It was exactly 11:22 in the morning on a Wednesday. The man who opened the door was not Derek Hartwell. He was younger than Derek. Not by decades, but by a visible, immediate, undeniable amount. Mid-30s. Taller than Derek, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of casual physical ease of a man who has never spent much time worrying about how he appears in spaces. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and charcoal sweatpants and holding a ceramic coffee mug with both hands, the way you hold something warm when you are settled into a morning and in no particular hurry to go anywhere. His feet were bare on Melissa's hardwood floor. Behind him I could see the entryway clearly, Melissa's green jacket on the hook by the door, the one she had been wearing in the photograph beside the maple tree. Her running shoes, the white ones with the teal laces, placed neatly beside the entry bench. The television was on in the living room, a cooking channel with the volume kept low, something being sautéed on screen while someone explained the technique in a calm instructional voice. Everything in the house looked like Melissa's house. The man holding the coffee mug did not look like anyone who lived in it secondarily or apologetically. He looked like a man who knew where the mugs were and where the good coffee was kept and approximately how long the neighbors had been in the neighborhood. He looked at me. I looked at him. The rain came down between us with complete indifference. He said, "Can I help you?" Friendly enough. Not alarmed. Just a man who had answered a door he felt completely entitled to answer. I said, "I am looking for Melissa." Something moved across his face then. I have thought about that movement many times since. It was not guilt in the conventional sense, not the flinch of someone caught doing something they know is wrong. It was something more organized than that. A recalibration. The look of a person who has been in uncertain situations before and has developed a procedure for them. He shifted his weight slightly. Something in his expression became more careful without becoming less pleasant. He said, "She is at work right now. Can I ask who you are?" And I said, "I am her father." The silence that came after that sentence was its own specific thing. Not just quiet. Sure. The kind of silence that happens when two people are suddenly aware that a conversation has just acquired a weight that neither of them can put back down, that something has been said that changes the shape of everything that comes after it. He took a small step back. He said, "You should probably come in." I did not go in. I said I would come back and I turned and walked back down the front path to the street with my rolling bag and my box of pecan turtles. I walked to the curb and I sat down on the edge of my rolling bag and I sat there in the Portland rain and I let the information take the shape it was always going to take. My hands had gone cold. I want to be precise about this. It was November in Portland and cold hands were the most reasonable thing in the world. But these were cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Cold from the inside out. Cold the way your body goes cold when it understands something your mind is still arranging the language for. Something moved across his face then. I have thought about that movement many times since. It was not guilt in the conventional sense, not the flinch of someone caught doing something they know is wrong. It was something more organized than that. A recalibration. The look of a person who has been in uncertain situations before and has developed a procedure for them. He shifted his weight slightly. Something in his expression became more careful without becoming less pleasant. He said, "She is at work right now. Can I ask who you are?" And I said, "I am her father." The silence that came after that sentence was its own specific thing. Not just quiet. Sure. The kind of silence that happens when two people are suddenly aware that a conversation has just acquired a weight that neither of them can put back down, that something has been said that changes the shape of everything that comes after it. He took a small step back. He said, "You should probably come in." I did not go in. I said I would come back and I turned and walked back down the front path to the street with my rolling bag and my box of pecan turtles. I walked to the curb and I sat down on the edge of my rolling bag and I sat there in the Portland rain and I let the information take the shape it was always going to take. My hands had gone cold. I want to be precise about this. It was November in Portland and cold hands were the most reasonable thing in the world. But these were cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Cold from the inside out. Cold the way your body goes cold when it understands something your mind is still arranging the language for. Something settled in my chest like furniture being moved into a room I did not want furnished. Heavy and deliberate and permanent feeling. The kind of weight that you know immediately will still be there when you wake up tomorrow. The kind that does not move with sleep or distraction or the passage of a few hours. It finds a place in you and it lives there until the thing that put it there has been fully resolved. I sat on that curb for 11 minutes. I watched the number on my phone's clock change. I did not call Melissa. I did not text her. I did not call anyone. I sat in the rain with the pecan turtles in my lap and I breathed the cold Portland air that smelled of wet pavement and pine and the particular mineral cold of a city that does not do winter dramatically but does it consistently and without mercy. After 11 minutes I picked up my bag and I walked 4 blocks to a Marriott that I had seen from the rideshare and I checked in and I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in my wet jacket and I thought carefully, deliberately, and without panic about what a man does next. I did not call Melissa. Not yet. Not from that place. Not while the furniture was still being moved into rooms I had not agreed to furnish. I needed to think from a position of clarity and I was not there yet. I ordered room service that I did not eat. I sat with the cold hands and the weight in my chest and I let myself know what I already knew. Then I called Theo. Theodore Briggs retired from the Fulton County Police Department after 27 years working primarily in financial crimes and domestic fraud, which means he spent more than 2 decades watching people systematically deceive the people closest to them and learning, over that time, how the mechanics of that deception work, what it looks like in the early stages, what signals get ignored because they are inconvenient, how long a careful person can maintain a deception before it begins to generate evidence of itself, whether they want it to or not. Theo and I have been friends since 1998, when our sons played on the same little league team in a dusty park off Memorial Drive and we spent 12 Saturday mornings in folding chairs at the edge of a chain-link dugout talking about our kids and our work and the ongoing and inexplicable decline of the Atlanta Braves. He lost his wife to a stroke 2 years after Carol. We have had dinner together once a month since then, alternating houses, cooking things that are either ambitious or catastrophically overconfident depending on the month, and talking about our children and our properties and the kinds of things men talk about when they have been through the same seasons and no longer feel the need to perform for each other. I told him what I had seen. The door. The man. The jacket on the hook. The running shoes. The practiced calm on the face of someone who had a story ready. Theo was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that means he is not preparing his response but actually listening to what was said and what was not said. Then he said, "Raymond, pay attention to this. A man who is genuinely surprised to find a father at his girlfriend's door does not invite the father inside. That invitation means he has already considered this possibility and he has already decided how he would handle it. The man who panics is the one who has no prepared story. This man had a prepared story. That means this has not been careless. That means this has been managed. Possibly for a long time." I said, "What does that mean for what I do now?" He said, "It means you do not react. Not yet. The moment you speak, you become reactive, and reactive is the weakest position available to you in this situation. You are holding information. Information is power only as long as the person you are dealing with does not know you have it. The moment you speak, you surrender the one advantage you currently possess. So before you say a single word to Melissa, to this man, or to your son-in-law, before you say a word to anyone, you find out exactly what you are dealing with. The complete picture. Not your assumptions about the complete picture. The actual picture." Then he said something I wrote down in the hotel notepad because I knew I would want to have it. "Raymond, a man who thinks he is being clever is still thinking. A man who has convinced himself he has already won is no longer paying attention. Find out which one you are dealing with. Then decide how to respond." I still have that notepad. It is on my desk at home between a photograph of Carol from 1994 and a pocket knife my father gave me the summer I turned 16. I look at it sometimes. I thanked Theo and I sat with the hotel room quiet around me and the Portland rain against the window, and I thought about the man in the sweatpants with his practiced calm and his prepared story, and I thought about Melissa's jacket on the hook and her running shoes by the door and the cooking channel on low in the living room of what was supposed to be her house, her life, the thing she had chosen and built. And I thought about what Theo had said about the complete picture. I extended my hotel stay by 4 days that night. I called my neighbor Marcus to feed my dogs. I called my contact at the firm to say I needed personal time. Then I ordered fresh coffee from room service and I sat with the notepad and I started thinking about what I actually needed to know and how to find it. His name was Sean Farrell. I found that out on the second morning, through a process that was less dramatic and more methodical than anything you would see in a movie. I went back to Melissa's neighborhood mid-morning and I approached the property management company whose sign I had noticed on a neighboring building during my first visit. I told the woman at the counter that I had left a phone charger at a friend's house on Melissa's street. I gave the house number, and I was hoping to retrieve it. She was helpful and casual and mentioned, in the course of being helpful, that the property was leased through an LLC called Farrell Partners. One thread. You pull one thread carefully and the next one becomes visible. Sean Farrell, 36 years old. Co-founder of a small real estate consulting firm operating primarily in the Portland and Eugene markets. Professional website with a firm headshot in a navy blazer. The blazer of a man who knows that Navy communicates trustworthiness without effort. Married to a woman named Kristen who maintained an active social media presence from Eugene, Oregon, approximately 112 miles from Portland. Their page documented weekend trips to a local farm stand, a golden retriever named Biscuit with considerable internet presence, and 2 children, a girl of approximately 4 and a boy who appeared to be around 2, photographed at a pumpkin patch in October with expressions of concentrated joy. I documented all of it. Methodically. Photographs of the website. The LLC registration from the Oregon Secretary of State Public Records database, printed at the Hotel Business Center on a Tuesday morning while 2 businesspeople in suits waited for the printer and I stood there in my jacket with my documents and gave them a polite nod. The registration date. The address of record. The professional biographies. Every piece of information that existed in the public domain I located, photographed, organized, and saved to 2 separate backup locations because I had been careful about things my whole life and I was not going to stop being careful now. The most significant piece of evidence arrived in a way I did not engineer and could not have anticipated. It arrived in my email on the 2nd Wednesday of my extended stay. Derek Hartwell had listed me as an emergency contact on a cell phone account 4 years earlier, during a period when both he and Melissa were covered under a plan through his employer. There had been a brief administrative period when certain billing notifications were copied to all listed contacts on the account. That copy permission had never been removed from my email address. I do not know exactly why it had not been removed. Perhaps it was carelessness. Perhaps Derek had never thought about it. Perhaps the universe occasionally takes a position. A monthly account summary arrived in my inbox on a Wednesday morning while I was drinking coffee in the hotel restaurant. I looked at it because I look at everything that arrives with their names on it, a habit I cannot explain except as a version of the same standing at the window before dawn instinct that had put me on the plane in the first place. There were 847 calls and texts logged to a Portland number over the preceding 11 months. The number, which I verified through a reverse lookup service that cost me $12, belonged to Sean Farrell. 847. I put the phone face down on the hotel restaurant table and I looked at the window and the wet Portland street outside it and the people moving through the rain under umbrellas and without them, going about Wednesday mornings with the ordinary focused momentum of people whose lives were currently intact, and I sat with that number. 847 contacts in 11 months is not a mistake. It is not a misunderstanding. It is not a friendship that crossed a line without anyone planning for it to. 847 is a parallel life, maintained in parallel, with the care and consistency of someone who has made a deliberate choice about what they want and decided the cost is acceptable to them. I did not explode. I did not get up from the table. I did not call anyone. I sat with my cold coffee and I breathed and I understood something clearly that I want to say carefully. It was not rage I felt. Rage would have been easier, actually. What I felt was something sadder than rage. A slow, heavy clarity, like a fog lifting off a landscape you had been hoping was prettier than it turned out to be. The landscape was what it was. The fog lifting did not change the landscape. It just removed the mercy of not being able to see it clearly. I took a photograph of the screen. I saved it to both backup locations. I saved the number separately. I put the phone in my jacket pocket. I finished the coffee. I paid the check. I walked back upstairs. I sat on the bed. And I thought about Theo's advice about not speaking until I had the complete picture, and I thought about the complete picture I now had, and I thought about Melissa sitting across from me at the Vietnamese restaurant 3 days earlier, tired in the way of someone maintaining 2 versions of themselves, holding on to me a few seconds too long on the sidewalk in the rain. Thought, she knows. Not everything. But enough of something. And she is carrying it alone. I flew back to Decatur that Thursday morning. I had been in Portland for 4 days and I had said nothing to anyone. I carried the complete picture home with me the way you carry something fragile, carefully, with both hands, without rushing. I spent 3 weeks back in Decatur before I made the call. I went to work. I fed my dogs in the mornings and walked the back fence line in the evenings the way I had been doing since Carol died, a habit that started as something to do with grief and became something I understood as necessary. The acreage in November is at its most honest, stripped of summer's generous concealment, the bones of the property visible, the creek running steady over the rocks at the eastern boundary with the low patient sound it makes in the cold months when there is no competing noise from insects or birds or the general warm weather busyness of things being alive. I ate dinner at the kitchen table. I watched the nature documentaries. I talked to Theo twice more, not about strategy, just about how I was doing, because Theo is the kind of man who asks that question and means it and listens to the answer. I told him I was fine in the way I was actually fine, which was, I had the weight in my chest and I was not fighting it, just carrying it, and I knew what I had to do and I was going to do it in the right way at the right time. I am not a man who moves fast when the stakes are high. 31 years of electrical work teaches you that the mistake that comes from hurrying costs more time in the end than the time you were trying to save. You do not rush into a wall cavity when you are not certain of what is in it. You verify. You prepare. You do the thing correctly because there is no undoing it later. On a Sunday morning in December, 3 weeks after I came home from Portland, I called Melissa. She answered on the second ring with the particular tone she uses when she is bracing herself, not unfriendly, not closed, just carefully held. I said I had something to tell her. I said it was about the November trip, the one I had told her was for a work estimate. I said I needed her to hear it from me, and I needed to come back to Portland to say it properly, and I needed to ask her to let me. She was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that is not considering whether to listen. The kind that is already listening. Then she said, "Dad, what did you see?" And I said, "I think you already know what I saw. But I think you need to hear everything I found out after." She did not speak for a moment. And then she cried. Not the crying of someone surprised. Not the crying of exposure. The crying of a person who has been holding something alone in a very small tight space for a very long time and has finally been given permission to put it down. I said, "I am going to come back. We are going to sit at your table and I am going to tell you everything I found and then we are going to figure out the next step together. Not me telling you what to do. Together." She said, "Okay." She said it small and clear and completely. I booked the flight that afternoon. I flew back on a Tuesday. She met me at her door herself this time. She was wearing the green jacket, the same one that had been on the hook when the man in the sweatpants answered the door 3 weeks earlier, and she looked like herself, and she looked exhausted, and she looked like she had spent the 3 weeks between my call and my arrival both dreading this conversation and needing it more than she had needed most things. We sat in her kitchen for 4 hours. She made tea she did not drink. She made it the way you make something with your hands when your hands need something to do. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and I laid everything out carefully, the way I would lay out tools before a job, each piece in its proper place, each piece with its proper name, nothing added and nothing withheld. The LLC registration, the firm website, the wife in Eugene and the children and the pumpkin patch photographs, the 11 months, the 847. After each piece she became more still. Not the stillness of shutting down. The stillness of receiving. Taking it in. Arranging it against what she already knew and understanding how it fit, how much larger it was than she had allowed herself to understand. By the end she was very quiet and very present, both of those things at once, and that specific combination, full presence, absolute stillness, reminded me so much of Carol in the moments when Carol was understanding something hard that I had to look out the window for a moment. She said, "I knew about Sean for 6 months. I did not know the rest of it. I did not know about the children." She said that last part in a very particular way. Factual. The voice of someone assembling information into its correct shape regardless of the pain of that shape. She looked at the photograph of Sean Farrell's firm website for a long time. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were dry. She had done the crying already, apparently, in the months of carrying this, and now she was past that and into something more operational. She said, "I am so sorry, Dad. I kept thinking I would handle it myself. I kept thinking." I said, "You do not owe me an apology. You owe yourself one. And when you are ready, you need to call an attorney." She called Christine Vargas that afternoon. Family law, Portland, 11 years of experience, referred by Theo's contact in the Oregon bar. They had a 90-minute initial consultation while I sat on Melissa's back porch in the December cold with a blanket over my lap and a cup of actual hot tea she had brought me before she closed the office door, and I watched the bare Japanese maple stand without apology in the winter yard, and I thought about Carol and about 11-day silences and about the things we hold alone that we should not have to hold alone, and about what it means to show up for the people you love, not with rescue but with presence and information and the willingness to sit at a kitchen table for 4 hours and not look away from what is true. The divorce proceedings began in January. Derek Hartwell was served papers at his office at 10:15 on a Thursday morning, which his personal assistant later described to a mutual acquaintance of Melissa's as requiring considerable composure from several people in a relatively open floor plan office environment. His attorney initially disputed the grounds, then shifted strategy, then requested a meeting to discuss settlement parameters, which Christine Vargas attended with documentation that made the dispute of grounds feel increasingly inadvisable. The discovery process, which his own financial records were subject to as part of standard proceedings, surfaced patterns in his financial management during the marriage that did not reflect well on a man whose professional identity was built on financial expertise. The settlement took 8 months. At the conclusion, Melissa kept the house, the car, and a financial arrangement that acknowledged 6 years of contributions to a household whose stability she had substantially underwritten during periods of his income variability. The arrangement also acknowledged certain other facts that had been established during discovery in a manner that Christine Vargas described as definitive. Derek Hartwell relocated to a rental in Northeast Portland. His professional profile was updated within 3 months to reflect a different firm. The firm he had been at for 6 years announced a restructuring shortly after. Sean Farrell's wife in Eugene arrived at her own version of the complete picture through her own process, in her own time, in a way that Melissa had no involvement in. That process resolved in a direction that suggested some truths have their own momentum once they begin moving, that they do not require assistance once they are actually in motion, that the work of discovery, once done, does not need to be pushed. 1 year after I stood on that curb in the Portland rain with the pecan turtles in my lap and the weight in my chest, I flew back for Thanksgiving. It was the first time it was just the two of us for Thanksgiving, without the construction of a larger gathering around us, without the performance of other people's comfort, and it was the right way to do it. Melissa cooked. She had been cooking more since the summer, she told me, finding it useful, finding it satisfying in a way she had not expected. She made a roasted chicken with herbs from a pot on her kitchen windowsill, a grain salad, a sweet potato dish that was her own variation on something Carol used to make differently, and a lemon tart from a recipe she had adapted over 3 attempts until it was correct. The kitchen was yellow. She had repainted it in February, right after Derek moved out. A warm, deep yellow that she had wanted since the day they moved in and that he had consistently voted against on grounds she no longer found relevant. She had also repainted the living room a deep sage green. The rooms were different colors than they had been, and they were more themselves, somehow, as though the house had been waiting to say what it actually wanted to say and was finally being allowed to say it. We ate at the kitchen table. After dinner we moved to the back porch with blankets and decaf coffee and the specific ease of 2 people who have been through something together and come out the other side knowing each other better. She told me about work, a new program she was developing for housing support in transition-age youth. She told me about a hiking trip she had taken with a friend in the Columbia River Gorge in September. She told me, carefully, in the way of someone who has learned the difference between saying things too early and saying things when they are ready to be said, about a man she had met through a friend. A teacher. She said he was actually good. She said it with the precision of someone who now understood that phrase as a technical distinction rather than a general impression. I drove back to my hotel at 9:30 through the wet Portland streets with the radio on low and the kind of tiredness that is not unpleasant, the kind that comes from a day fully spent in the right way. I thought about the year. About the window at 5:40 in the morning with the cold coffee. About the curb in the rain. About the 4 hours at the kitchen table. About what it costs us to know things and what it costs us more not to know them. About a Japanese maple losing its last copper leaves and the specific stubbornness of things not yet ready to let go. Here is what I know now that I did not know clearly enough before, and I want to say it carefully because I mean it precisely and not poetically. The instinct that woke me up at 5:40 in the morning and would not let me put the cold coffee down and go back to bed, that was not anxiety. That was not an old man's fearfulness or projection or the particular sadness of a widower who loves his daughter too much to let her live her own life. That instinct was information. Real, accurate, specific information arriving through a channel I had spent 62 years building without knowing I was building it, the accumulated sensory record of watching people, noticing things, tucking signals into drawers I knew how to open. That instinct was right. It had been right for months before I acted on it. And every month I spent talking myself out of it had a cost, and the cost was paid by Melissa, not by me. I do not tell you this to frighten you. I tell you this because I think a great number of people watching this right now have an instinct they are currently in the process of talking themselves out of. A conversation that went slightly sideways and then got explained away. A number on a phone bill that did not quite make sense. A tone of voice from someone who was supposed to be where they said they were. A Sunday morning silence that has been going on longer than anyone has mentioned. A child who is tired in a specific way that has nothing to do with being tired. You are not paranoid. You are not dramatic. You are not an old man or woman standing at a window in the dark with cold coffee and too much love and not enough to do with it. You are awake. Being awake is not a character flaw. Being awake is not an imposition on the people you love. Being awake is the most faithful thing you can be to the people whose lives intersect with yours. The people who benefit most from your willingness to explain things away are the people with the most to lose when you stop explaining things away. I want to speak to some of you directly for a moment. If you are a parent and something about your child's situation has been sitting wrong for months, not dramatically, just quietly, consistently, in the way an off note sits in a piece of music you have heard 1,000 times and suddenly cannot unhear, trust that. You have been learning that particular music for 20, 30, 40 years. You know when something is missing from the composition. You are allowed to go find out what it is. If you are carrying all the financial knowledge of a household by yourself, meaning you are the one who knows where all the accounts are and your partner would not be able to locate the statements without help, I would like you to consider, not with alarm but with clarity, what that asymmetry means and whether it is by design. Pull 3 months of statements. Read the line items, not the totals. If anything does not make sense, you are allowed to ask. Asking is not accusation. Asking is just being awake to your own life. If you are the adult child of a parent who is being taken advantage of by someone in a position of trust, a partner, an adult sibling, a financial advisor, anyone, and you have been telling yourself it is not your place, that your parent is an adult, that you do not have all the information and therefore you should stay out of it. Your parent built you for exactly this situation. The relationship goes both directions. You are allowed to show up. If you are still inside the hard part, the part where you know something is wrong but you do not yet know the full shape of it and you are carrying that knowledge alone in a very small tight space, I am not going to tell you that it gets easier immediately. It does not. There is a specific exhaustion that comes from maintaining the performance of normal while privately holding information that changes everything, and that exhaustion is real and it is heavy and you should not minimize it. What I can tell you is this: the weight in your chest is asking you to do something. Not to explode. Not to confront without preparation. Not to make yourself the chaos of a situation that is already chaotic enough. It is asking you to find out the complete picture, calmly, and then to act from a place of information rather than reaction. The information is the power. Reaction without information is just noise. Noise does not help anyone and it does not change anything. Clarity changes things. You loved your people correctly. If they did not love you back in kind, those are 2 different stories and you are only responsible for yours. Do not let the way someone else handled their chapter rewrite the story of how you handled yours. And carry this home with you when this video ends and the next thing in your life requires your attention. Is there something you already know that you have been giving yourself permission not to act on? Not because you lack the evidence. Not because the instinct is uncertain. But because acting on it would require a kind of honesty about your life that is more expensive than continuing to look slightly away from what is true? If so, what exactly are you waiting to feel before you trust yourself enough to take the first step? The gut is almost never wrong. It is just inconvenient. Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe the right decision is always to find the truth quietly and completely before you say a single word, the way Raymond did. Drop a 2 if you think Melissa had the right to discover and manage this on her own terms, and that a father's involvement, however loving, changes the shape of something that ultimately belonged to her. Drop a 3 if something in this story landed somewhere real in your own life. You do not have to explain what. You do not have to say anything more than the number. I read every single one, and the 3 comments are the ones I think about the longest. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. Someone is watching this at 2:15 in the morning from somewhere I would not have guessed, in a room they are sitting in alone because they needed to hear something that sounded true, and somehow this particular story was the one they needed tonight. That means something to me every time. Every single time. If this channel is the place you come when you need to hear that quiet people are not weak people, that patience is a form of power, that dignity is not the same as passivity, that the person who is calmest in the room is usually the one who has already won, then you belong here. Subscribe and come back. There is always another story. There is always someone who needs to hear it.